Motherhood, but not quite as we imagine. Thought-provoking, refreshing, straightforward, sometimes taboo, often seemingly ordinary, but always honest. Welcome to School for Mothers, opening conversations we all need to have, exploring ways in which you can be fulfilled as a woman, once a mother. Now, here is your host, mother of 10, Danusha Melina Durban.
Hello and welcome back to the School for Mothers podcast. I'm Danusha Melina Durban, your host. Let's dive into today's episode. My special guest is Sarah Forbes. Now, she was dubbed a sexpert supreme by Cosmopolitan magazine. For more than a decade, she served as the curator of the Museum of Sex in New York, and she cultivated a wealth of experiences, I bet, for her first book. A memoir is called Sex in the Museum, My Unlikely Career at New York's Most Provocative Museum. She has a graduate degree in anthropology. Her background emphasises a socio-cultural, historical perspective on sex, so it's not a medical perspective, and she explores the tremendous variety and diversity that currently exists in the sexual landscape. Now, she's a storyteller through objects. She's had the unique pleasure of being an Indiana Jones of sex. I really like that, an Indiana Jones of sex. She's a curator, author, consultant, sexual culturalist, and personal ethnographer. And she's currently working on her second book called Mama Sex, sure to be of great interest to us all, I bet. I've got a really big feeling that today's conversation is going to be juicy. Now, both Sarah and I have had a lot of time to consider sex toys, and that's because of our study of them. Now, as I once was academic, I spent years researching sex shops and published on hedonistic consumption. Some of this research involved me working in sex shops, helping people choose sex toys of all kinds, and everything to do with sex in sex shops. I was your woman. In there for years. What I loved about those years was that I pretty well had every assumption blown apart, truly. So I'm hoping to shimmy into areas today in my conversation with Sarah that we usually don't talk about, unless of course it's with your very, very best friend. You can be sure Sarah and I are not going to fanny about when it comes to getting down to the nitty-gritty of all things that turn us on. Let's head on over to my conversation with Sarah Forbes on sex toys. Listeners, you'll know that I really rather enjoy talking about sex. We have a number of Wednesday conversations on the topic of sex. I mean, after all, Laid, that gives you a very, very good clue. Stephanie Dominy, that one. And then we have Erotic with Sally Blenky. And Gaze, who knew that was about pussy gazing, with wonderful Lacey Haynes. So today, I mean, seriously, sex toys. And, I'm so excited to be joined today with you, Sarah Forbes. Thank you so much for coming on to talk about sex toys.
Well, I'm happy to join the conversation.
Well, where should we dive in? I mean, what should we say? However did you get to be curator of the Museum of Sex?
Yes, it's definitely a title that you don't forget. So basically, I kind of happened into it. So I went to I'm from the US. I was going to grad school in New York City, the New School for Social Research. And if you'd asked me then, I had this whole plan of being your favorite professor, teaching anthropology 101 and living with a tribe in the Amazon. But little did I know that my post-college grad school apartment would be right around the corner from the Museum of Sex, which had just opened in New York City. And I decided, to drop off my resume. When you're young, you think, why not? You can just, that's the way to make something happen. And another anthropologist was leaving to do their field work. So I began there. I was 22 years old. I began as a researcher. I'm going to grad school full time. Then I became assistant curator. And then when I was, I'd finished my master's, I became a curator. And I ended up being this one-of-a-kind institution for about 12 years.
It is a one-of-a-kind, isn't it? It's absolutely fantastic. I love it.
Oh, I'm so glad. That's wonderful to hear. I think, and a lot of people, they're like, what is the Museum of Sex? I think particularly, now I live in London, and I think lots of people have been exposed to many of the erotic museums that exist that tend to be a little bit more touristic. They maybe don't have as much curatorial scholarship that surround them. And, the Museum of Sex in New York, when it opened in 2002, really aimed to be like any other museum, cultural institution, but tackle the subject of sex and sexuality, one that, has so many cultural taboos and misconceptions, and from which we don't actually have a lot of, education on the topic.
Yeah. So what I really enjoy about it is that it's not a salacious kind of tourist event, if you like, a kind of pop-up thing that just, is titillate, if you like. I really love that. It's quite the opposite.
Yeah. And I think it's important. You have to have that balance of, I truly believe to have a positive educational experience, it also does need to be fun. I think you need to have a little bit of playfulness, a little bit of humor. I think great design helps you have that experience. Also, it is not the everyday experience to walk in a museum, see extremely graphic content, and be watching that with strangers. So I think, you kind of have to get people comfortable in a space that is very unfamiliar.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And that's a fine kind of line, isn't it? And a bit of a dance to get that playful element and create safety, because we're not used to experiencing those things with people that we've never seen, looking at that graphic material. So yeah, absolutely. So we are taking a slice of today, a kind of little slice of your wisdom and knowledge from those years and since then, because I know there's way more to you than those 12 years, which I'm sure we'll cover, and looking at, like sex toys.
Well, I think when it comes to sex toys, I think we think that it's something brand new and that, it's only existed in maybe the last couple of years. And it's true that they've become more popularized and I think more normalized, but sex toys, they've existed for, hundreds and hundreds of years, centuries and centuries. People have always created these objects. If you kind of look around through, archaeological sites, there are tons of these phallic-like objects that have been used for sexual pleasure. And you have documentation of this all over the world. In Japan, you'd have, people have called it happy boxes now, but the courtesans they'd use from all different kinds of materials. They would take tortoise shell and mold it into these phallic shapes. Maybe they would have straps on it that you could, a woman could attach it to her body. I mean, this idea of using these all kinds of materials for enhanced sexual experiences has been around forever.
Yeah, well, desire and pleasure has been around forever.
It has.
It's not a modern thing, is it? It's not, the libido and the urges and wanting is, riven into the experience of being human, surely. So yeah, I was assuming that we would cover, the history, that kind of what's the earliest sex toy? Do you know? I mean, I'm not expecting you to know the exact like it was then, but broadly.
Well, you have these archaeologists and they're digging around sites and they have, I mean, like I said, centuries and centuries old and even longer. It's sometimes you have to kind of guess how, what you discover these objects. You have to put some pieces together. I mean, that's part of the journey of that academic. But yes, you see these things. I mean, if you look even at places like Pompeii, which is kind of like a archaeological wonderland, there is so much graphic sexual content in Pompeii because there were brothels. They have all kinds of, symbols of penises all over the place. Some of them was a kind of good luck signs and protection of, the house, but it's also, hey, here is the brothel menu. Here's the services. And here are some of those services that also include, sexual objects, prehistoric, sex toys.
Wow. I'm deeply thankful to you also. I don't know what number episode this is in the School for Mothers podcast, but this is the first time the word penis has actually been said. I'm
Oh,
pretty
really?
sure. I'm so grateful to you. Thank you, Sarah. Yes.
Well, I don't really shy away from any of the real words to describe body birth. So,
well, I'm sure, and hallelujah. I'm so glad you don't. But in fact, I have a funny story because I like to come up with the one syllable word titles and chat over those with guests. And I asked this wonderful woman, who I won't mention her name, and I wanted her to have the episode called Cock. I was like, yes, you got to do one on cock. And I was like 99% sure that she'd run towards this and say, can't wait. And actually she ran in the opposite direction and said, no way. And I understand when we talked about it, I completely understood why that wasn't for her. But I'm still looking. If there's any listeners out there, by the way, that would love to have a conversation about cock with me, oh, please, just do it to make me happy, please, if you could. So, and it's funny because, of course, I'm sure that, I'm sure somebody would like to.
I'm sure I know lots of people that in my professional space would be happy and prepared to have a great conversation.
Yes. Oh dear. Anyway, moving back to sex toys. Forgive me for my little digression.
No, it's great.
So, yeah, now I'm not really a sex toy woman. Not really. In fact, I mean, I was thinking about this conversation, and I was thinking, I said the silly words, I don't think I've got any stories about sex toys. I don't really, because they're not really me. I don't know what I mean by that, but just, I don't have a drawer full of sex toys that I enjoy or use. So although over the years I have had sex toys in my, drawers and wherever I fancied keeping them. And then I suddenly remembered I have a whole host of sex toy stories. Because as I was thinking about, I'm not that kind of woman, then I thought, oh gosh, yes, there was that time in the airport that I got stopped because of various sex toys. Oh, and then I couldn't stop myself. And so even though I consider myself a not sex toy woman, it made me curious about, why do I see myself as not a sex toy woman? Are there women that actually are really into sex toys and have collections? And what do you think?
Oh, absolutely. I think, also what's, I guess we had that kind of pre-conversation about this historical idea of sex toys, but also just even in the last, decade or so, what sex toys have changed. And
Yes.
I think the fact that they are no longer just these kind of novelty toy, like gag gift kind of things.
Yes.
And now they're beautifully designed. They're made out of, gorgeous materials. They're not these, silly objects. They're almost they're accessories, they're lifestyle accessories.
Yes.
And I think that has helped a lot of women maybe change that idea of like, ooh, I'm not a sex toy woman, to why not be a sex toy woman? I have all kinds of accessories in my life. Why not have another that brings me pleasure? And I can, maybe use it by myself. Maybe I have a drawer full of sex toys for myself. Maybe I have a different drawer full of sex toys that I use in, partnered play.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And that there doesn't need to be a taboo about it anymore. I think it's, you have, the statistics change, back and forth between there's a vibrator in 1 out of 3 homes, 1 out of 4 homes. So this is, it's an ubiquitous object.
Yes.
That's, and I think particularly, you have these kind of media moments, but, it was a long time ago at this point. But when you talked about the rabbit on Sex and the City and, not just talked about a vibrator or a sex toy, but named it.
Yes.
It changed the conversation. So anybody could be a sex toy woman.
Yes. I was slightly surprised that I was disowning that kind of badge because I have no shame about it. I mean, what would I be doing an episode on sex toys for? I mean, there's no shame that's attached to that sense of, am I one of those women at all? And I think that taboo, as you say, has really dissolved. It used to be something that we didn't talk about.
It is. And, I think there's a big difference between shame and just being private. So
yes,
in my work, I am probably, I'm very, very open. I'm not judgmental. I've been exposed to every possible form of sex and sexuality you can imagine, and put into scenarios. But I myself am actually very private about my sexuality. And I've always been that way. I've had, you have a group of girlfriends and there's some people in your group of girlfriends and they tell you every detail of every encounter.
Yes.
I mean, you have like the most vivid, understanding. And I love those girlfriends. I've just never been one of those women. And it doesn't, I'm very comfortable in my body. I'm comfortable in my sexuality. I'm comfortable in the kind of the larger space. And I think we all make these different categories for ourselves. And it doesn't mean you're less sexual because you don't maybe talk about it as much.
I think you've hit the nail on the head. I'm really, really private, super private about this. Even though I studied sex and sex shops for years and wrote about it and hedonistic consumption and all those things, I like to keep, almost acute privacy around it. It's not shame. It really isn't shame. As you say, no, I just don't want to discuss it. Or rather, I'm very much a choice when I do, in terms of I'm very, very selective in what I share about not my pleasure or my, my likes, my desires, just really about sex toys and that kind of thing. It's really, I've had to think about it. Now, you talk about, I love the idea of, what was it in vibrators in how many homes?
Yeah, people say one out of every 3 or every 4 homes.
Right. Well, you see, I wonder when they move home, what they do with their sex toys. What do we all do with our sex toys when we move home? I know what I do. My partner, or when I've moved, when I'm on my own, I consciously think, okay, I've got the removal men coming in, or women. I'm like, okay, I don't want them to be looking at those. I don't want them to know that. It's because I'm private. Not because I always be worried about them knowing that it's just, no, it's my private things. And so then I bundle things up and I put them in the car. And I have to, I actually have to actively think, right, so.
No car accidents for you then. No,
no car accidents. I never even thought about that. Please, now you've introduced that risk.
Well, I guess, so part of my work at the museum is that I would go into people's homes and be exposed to their various collections, that would pertain to whatever exhibition I was creating at that time.
Uh-huh.
But also a lot of these calls would be somebody's passed away, and in the process of going through their estates and their belongings, they've come across a lot of either erotic material or sex toys or what,
I'm cringing. I am cringing. Do I need to write something in my will about my sex toys?
Your trusted good friend who goes in there and gets it before your grandkids do.
Oh my God.
So that's or maybe you don't care and you say, wow, grandma was really progressive and awesome. And she took her satisfaction,
Seriously.
Yeah.
Good. I prefer the latter. That one I like.
Yes. Mm-hmm. So, I guess, but it is, I think we've all been raised in a different environment. And I think each generation of women, I'll just say women because, we're talking in this particular space, has a different relationship to it. I know we have babysitters come to our house.
Yeah.
And my bookshelves are sex. I've written a book called Sex in the Museum, my unlikely career at New York's most provocative museum. So, it's all around me. So and I see them, they don't even ask me. They don't even give me a funny look. And then I always forget to say, oh yeah, by the way, these are professional books, give that. And they're like, yeah, that's okay. We didn't care.
I have the same. I have exactly the same. So I have my home is littered with books on sexuality and sex and orgasms, and I have art and it's actually my children's friends love it.
I'm sure. My children are still little. I have a 5-year-old and a 7-year-old, but I guess they've also been raised in an environment where we talk very openly about bodies and how they work, and there's no taboos of words. We use the real words, and so back to that kind of that generation, like, so maybe the way that my mother's generation or grandmother's generation, or for me to the the babysitter generation to my kids, we do have a different relationship with the topic, and therefore I think we'll have a different relationship when it comes to talking about sex toys.
Absolutely. I hope it's more open, and permissive and assumptive that actually women's pleasure is incredibly important. I mean, actually, our pleasure, human beings' pleasure is really important, but particularly women's in the context of our conversation.
It can be a great way to also get to know your own body better. So, lots of, sex educators will recommend, if you know your body and you know what kind of sensation your body likes, and you can experiment, because there are so many different kinds of toys. Some toys are penetrative, some toys vibrate, some toys have, all kind of different maneuvers. Some are made out of different materials. You can have all different kinds of temperature play that kind of is incorporated. Toys that are made to, manipulate specific parts of the body, whether they be internal or external, so people are really thinking about all of those nuances. And so if you experiment with those, and let's just say, that starting place with by yourself, you get to know your body better, what you like better. And then, when you communicate that with a partner, and communication is just critical, you're really opening yourself up to so much possibility of pleasure.
Yeah, exactly. I wonder about noise, like noisy sex toys and being a mother.
I think the noisy sex toys is definitely a thing. And that's why a lot of sex toy manufacturers, they label that. They're like, this is a, more silent vibrator.
Yeah.
Because you definitely, maybe you don't want your entire house shaking from the the sounds of something. But so people, they're actively thinking about those need sets in this new generation of sex toys.
Of course they are. And, I haven't mentioned this before, but in the next few weeks, we've got a really lovely School for Mothers competition coming up, a contest. And we've got a brilliant tech pack that I've curated to give away to the number one winner. And I'll say the details at a later time. But the reason I'm mentioning it now to you is because in the pack, in that tech bundle, I absolutely went out and found a noiseless vibrator.
Oh, and it's wonderful. Yeah. It's a great addition. I think people will be very excited to receive.
Yeah, exactly. Because while you're wherever you are in your home, and particularly when you get, not so much young children, but once they get to that kind of 7, 8, 9, 10, and certainly in their teens, I think us mothers have that question about how do we one, pleasure ourselves. And, it's not all about partnered pleasure, is it? As you say, but how do we pleasure ourselves in, you've got teenagers downstairs with your friends, and there's mum's upstairs, she's doing her thing, and I've had different stages of my life where I've been out and out very, I think, quite bold with it, and discussed that with my older children now about, Mum, I remember you, we knew exactly what you were doing. And you knew too, and you were fine with it. And now I'm slightly less like that. Like, I'm really questioning, who do I want to be? It's not a changed relationship to sexuality at all. I'm possibly even more of a sexual being than I was then, if you can be, but I think so. But actually, I'm just questioning, what's your...
I think we're constantly evolving. And I think, giving ourselves that permission to be an entity that's constantly evolving is really important. And I think that's across all facets of our life, but particularly with sexuality. I know, they'll say that, as women become older, they become more confident, or you feel more comfortable. Maybe you feel more comfortable even just communicating your wants and needs and desires. And so what you liked at one point may be different. Yes. And that's okay. And you maybe at one point you're saying, oh, I would never try that. But then you get to another point and you say, you know what, maybe, why not? Or if, let's say you've been with a partner for an extended period of time, I think it's important to keep on growing and exploring. I think, you could have the exact same sexual encounter over and over for the rest of your life, or you could try and maybe make it something new and add new elements to it. And that's part of you discovering yourself, discovering your partner if you have one, and allowing that, giving yourself that space to grow as that person.
Mm-hmm. I think the ability to do that on a solo way is fundamental. So, to give space for that, to give ourselves permission, but also the time and the space to experiment and to spend money on things that might bring us new sensations.
And that's true. And I think a lot of people, when they see the price tags associated sometimes with the higher end sex toys, they'll be like, oh, maybe that's a little too much. That feels like too much of a splurge in this space of my life. And yes, there are some great, less expensive toys. But, when you really think about it, this object potentially going near your most delicate parts of your body, maybe it is that space to splurge on something that could contribute to this side of yourself. And it's not necessarily a selfish splurge. And I think mothers are always guilty of, they put everybody first in every way, and that you taking care of yourself and feeling satisfaction on all levels, it helps us so much in being those caregivers in these extended ways.
Yeah, it does. And I think one of the worries that when I worked in the sex shops and during my research, I found that women were worried about, buying sex toys and then realizing that they're not actually going to do the trick, whatever the trick is. Yeah. And I remember being taught to put a vibrator on the tip of my nose to test its strength of vibration, which actually is really, I find, a very good way of assessing how strong it is, the force of it, the kind of, just the intensity, the speed. So that led me to think about secondhand sex toys.
I don't know how I feel about secondhand sex toys. But I don't know if I have as much experience with it. I kind of think, you do need to think about care and maintenance, but maybe I need to be exposed to more on the topic.
Well, I think what it is that it relates to what you just said, which is, you're thinking, oh my gosh, this is a splurge. This is £80, £100 or whatever it is, whatever a splurge is for somebody. Maybe it's 50, maybe it's 30. That, giving ourselves the gift of that experimentation and finding new ways to have pleasure, and, rather than getting one rabbit and using that for 10 years, because actually that will only bring a certain kind of, and it might work. It might just do exactly what you want. But on the other hand, as you said, there are many, many sex toys. There are, from butt plugs and strap-ons to, G-spot, these are just some basics. And so, but that requires the funds to do it. And then if you get it home and, so for instance, there was this sex toy. Oh God. Oh no, I'm private, but hey ho. That's about
Let's go for it.
Yeah,
Let's go
throw
for
it out the window. There was this, and I cannot remember what it was. I wish I could remember the name, but I can't. But it was this kind of triangle thing. And you kind of sit on it almost. Yeah. And it was supposed to be this remarkable, it had different pulsating cycles of pulsating motion and movement. And I just thought, well, I'd be a fool not to try that, and spent quite a lot of money on it. I have to say I ought to have known better, in the sense that I sometimes have a problem with the controller for the television. So why ever I thought that I would master the controller for this pulsating machine, and then, go through different waves of, strengths of whatever. I don't know. I must have thought I was a new woman, a different woman, because I got this thing, I sat on it and I thought, wow, one, I just didn't enjoy the position. I was like, well, what am I doing here? I mean, this feels odd. It just didn't work for me. And then, so anyway, I tried it a couple of times and I thought, no, this is a shame. It was pristine. I had not bleached it, but I'd disinfected it. And I did a heinous thing. I didn't send it back. Of course I didn't. It's not that bad. I actually gave it to a friend and said, throw it away. I was honest, throw it away if, but this was a very, very, very expensive thing. And I can't bear to actually chuck it in the bin. It might bring such pleasure to somebody else. And it was okay. The friendship is still intact. It's all right. But it was all a bit embarrassing and awkward. And I can't believe now, even as I'm cringing as I actually tell this story, that's what led me to think about secondhand toys, because I was like, this is awful. There's this thing languishing, this beautiful object that just doesn't bring me to orgasm, doesn't have a hope in hell of doing that. I know my body really well. It's like, no, that's not going to ever work. I don't have the time to invest in crouching over this thing, trying to work out the the actual, little controller. I was like, oh, to hell with that. Somebody else might be so much better. And then I have to tell you, I slept with this guy who he didn't do much sleeping. He had a side cabinet by his bed, a little, bedside cabinet full of sex toys. Now, he probably was the first man that I had encountered, of a few, who used sex toys that he kept for different women. Now, I didn't enjoy that, Sarah.
No, I could understand.
That just burst the moment. The moment was burst when he put his hand out, he opened this large drawer and rifled around and found an object. I was like, what are you doing? And he, then had this thing in his hand. I was like, is that brand new? No, it's not brand new. I was like, could you not, please? Thank you. That was it for me.
I mean, I get it. I mean, I guess there's a couple of different intersections with that. I think one, you do need to make sure that sex toys have been disinfected and are safe to use. I think that's just something that's really important. Even if you have a sex toy that you just use yourself, it's a brand new sex toy, you do need to, there is a process of kind of maintaining your sex toy, cleaning your sex toy. I mean, and I think that's really important for people to know just in general, even if it's not going near anyone else's body. There is that kind of that process. Yeah. But if you are going to be using a toy and maybe you're going to be using, let's say, multiple partners, or that, those are important.
Yeah.
And so it's like in those moments it's the same kind of safe sex that you need to be thinking about if you're having an encounter with somebody you don't maybe know as well. So, I think that was, I understand that reaction that you had. And I think, there's a safety and health and well-being, but there's also, I think sometimes we like to have that feeling of like, wow, I'm the one and only in this space, and not maybe one of many people who are participating in this cabinet full of fun.
Yes. I felt done to. With objects that were generic as opposed to specific. Yeah, it's a funny way of putting it, but I actually have never talked about this. It's funny, I have never actually mentioned it. I was a little aghast, and it isn't because it's not the feeling of, oh my goodness, he's a man that has many lovers. Oh, that's fantastic for him. I really mean it. Wonderful for him. I just didn't want to be the one that was having a multi-used dildo or vibrator, or and actually what happened was he put the one he got out down and said, oh, I've got some others to take a look. I was like, he thought it was because of the choice that he'd made, as opposed to, do I really have to rifle through your sex toys?
Yes. But, I think there's a lot of that's also coming down to assumption. And I think in whatever space in our life, and it doesn't just have to be our sex space, when somebody makes an assumption about what we want or what we like or what's okay, you're kind of going into dangerous territory. And I think, particularly when you're, there is an openness and a vulnerability when you're engaged with somebody in a sexual way that you don't want any assumptions made. And, that ability to communicate and feel empowered enough to communicate, which I think, not everybody feels at all times, is really important. And I think, back to what you were saying about, that particular sex toy didn't work for you. There isn't this like one size fits all sex toy that this works for every single person in every single moment and every single situation. And, I think it can feel a little intimidating, but when you go into, certain sex shops and you know that, particularly ones that are, really open, supportive, have very educated staff members, they can help walk you through that process in a less intimidating way. And so you can, before you even put out that money to buy that really expensive thing, you can kind of start to understand and ask some questions. And that information is really empowering.
Yeah, it is.
And, you may not always get that, the right one, but maybe you get that entry one that then, okay, well then maybe I like this I like really hard vibration, or no, I don't like really hard vibration, or, whatever it may be. And then you can kind of, as you learn more, kind of like with wines. If you don't know anything about wine, you're fine to drink whatever. But the more you become educated about it, you do start to taste those differences. And you might want to try that, and it might be worth that higher price tag.
Yeah, absolutely. Why do you think the rabbit is, I mean, you've just said there's no one size fits all. We know that. But the rabbit can't even say it now, vibrator, is often, put forward as the panacea to all, women's orgasmic needs. That's my sense.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple of things to it. I think because it's so well recognized, it feels less taboo to purchase. So if you're even psychologically, your mind and your body are tremendously related. And if you're feeling more comfortable with something, it feels less scary. Your body's probably more open to having a pleasurable experience. But on top of that, I think the way that the rabbit is designed, and, there's so many companies that have done iterations of this, that it understands that female pleasure and satisfaction is not just penetrative. And it really does focus on clitoral stimulation. And I think you have more and more toys, and you see more and more women that are getting involved in the sex tech space.
Yes.
And saying, oh, actually, the clitoris is really important. Let's not ignore the clitoris. Let's make toys that are specifically geared towards that kind of stimulation. And it doesn't mean to say that that's the only thing that works. There's lots of different things, but the rabbit in particular, it's combining, penetrative and clitoral stimulation, which is, the more, angles that you're going at, the probably more likelihood you are to have an orgasm.
Where do you stand on the G spot? I know you don't stand on it, by the way.
Oh, yeah. I guess for me, and I'm coming to all of this space as an anthropologist. I deal with more like history and arts and what's going on at contemporary. I don't have a medical opinion, but I think if you as a woman feel that you are getting G-spot stimulation, who am I to say that you're not?
Yeah, exactly.
And I don't think it's, no one's a failure because they were unable to achieve G-spot stimulation. We have different bodies, and what works for one person may not work for another person. One person may swear that, this is, the pleasure that they are able to achieve, and another person may not. And so, I think, more power to you, the more pleasure that you're able to achieve.
And that's why that experimentation is so important, isn't it? And just really getting to know our own bodies, not worrying about, not kind of getting hooked into, I think, the narrative about other people's abilities, when really we've got our instrument, if you like, our bodies are our pleasure central, zone. And so, that's the thing to really concentrate on.
100%. You can't compare yourself to other people, but you do need to get to know yourself.
Yeah.
And that's, I think that's just such a important thing. And for us as adults, and also, in every way as we, raise our children, that your body is your body, and your body to take care of, your body to, explore, and your body to know. And hopefully, I hope I practice what I I preach, and also in how I, speak in my home and raise my children.
Mm-hmm. Mm. I think it can be challenging. It's an area that I was just talking the other day about this with some friends over a drink. They were like, well, how do you navigate this? What do we call things? At what age is it appropriate to talk about what? And of course there isn't an answer. It's your children are your children, and your comfort and your capacity to go into this area. I mean, for instance, my teen daughters, the triplets are 6, and my teens are obviously teens, and so they've been going through, the PHCSE at school, and so that often includes sex education, of course. But we have already talked about clitorises and more, of course, not just clitorises. But the fact is, particularly both of them have talked about how their friends don't have those conversations with their parents. It's more biological, kind of, this is what happens if you do this and you then get pregnant, as opposed to pleasure-based, as opposed to sexual pleasure rather than just reproduction. I think there's a massive difference in those ways. And sometimes we don't really know quite how we're going to do it till we're there,
So you're thrown into it, and how it's been so interesting for me. So I started at the Museum of Sex. I was in this train, speaking about sex, all kinds of public platforms, creating exhibitions on all kinds of subject matter. And then, I became a mother myself, with this in the background. And it's, you have these as with my professional background, I go to, mom coffees and play dates and, mama drinks and all of these kinds of things. And the topic of sex always comes up, and it's always the topic of, mothers and their relationship to sex and their relationship to their bodies. And then also, how do I talk to my children about it? And like you said, every family is going to negotiate it in a different way. We all come from different backgrounds. But I think that the more information you give in an age appropriate way, starting when they're very young, it just makes it very, very normal. You don't have to have this big talk moment.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I think that it just, when you start a conversation slowly with kind of information over time, it's less traumatic for everybody involved than having to sit down and be like, okay, so here's this thing. I also think, particularly with children, it's empowering, and I think it's a safety measure to be able to talk about your body with accurate words.
Yeah. So tell me what you mean by accurate words.
So to call your penis a penis, my little girl, we've chosen to use the word vagina versus vulva, but she'll talk about her vagina all the time, to my Irish husband's embarrassment, because he has grown up in a very different culture.
What would his family call the vagina?
I don't know if they would even have a word for the vagina.
Yeah.
But like, for example, we were talking to some of his Irish friends, and the mother, she's a lawyer, she's a very progressive woman, but with her daughters, they call it her front butt.
Oh. Mm-hmm.
I had never heard that before, but everybody, it's very confusing when you don't use the accurate words. So even if you use something that's very cute, and maybe, so what if you said, oh, my flower, mama, my flower hurts, or, something happened, or not everybody may know that secret word that you're using in your household.
Well, lots of people call it minis. My mini.
Minis.
Mm-hmm. My mini. But we've got a mini car.
Yes, as an American, and if somebody said to me, a child said something to me about a mini, I would have no idea what they were talking about. Mm-hmm. So I wouldn't be able to help. I'd say, you're having a problem with your mini. I don't know what that is. Mm-hmm. So, but if she said, let's say there's a little girl and she's having a play date with us, and she's like, my vagina's hurting, I'd be like, oh, okay, I know what you're talking about, and when her parents came to pick her up, I'd be able to say, just so you know, so-and-so was complaining that, their vagina hurts. And so they can go.
Yeah. Do you differentiate between the vulva and the vagina?
I think yes. And I think I will when like I said, she's 5 now. Yes. I think I will when she gets a little bit bigger. For example, my little girl, she's been having urinary problems for the last year. Mm-hmm. And So her being able to tell me what's going on has been really important. And then the other day at breakfast, and she has, her 7-year-old brother's at the table, and she's like saying something about peeing out of her vagina. I was like, no, you don't pee out of your vagina, you pee out of your urethra.
Yes. Yeah.
And just, I think there's lots of grown women that don't know exactly where they pee out of and what things are.
Yeah.
And so she's like, okay, fine. And so also, and then my little boy heard that as well. And nobody bats an eyelash. Okay, cool. That is where I pee out of. And that's just kind of how bodies work.
Well, also this relates to when we go into a sex shop or wherever we go and look at sex toys, our ability to be transparent, it kind of be just, I don't know whether it's forthright, but open and able to communicate about what we do like. If we haven't had that kind of relationship of being able to express and talk about our bodies, then we're hampered. We can't say, well, I would imagine, we can't say, well, I kind of like it there and not here. And so when I did my research in sex shops, I would have women come in particularly in the women-only sex shops, were absolutely beautiful and like sanctuaries. And women would come in and say, yeah, I like it exactly like this. I like, I use a pillow. I want something that's soft like that, but just want to try. And they would be able to talk. And then there were other women that would come in and just kind of almost have this cryptic conversation. And I'd been fumbling around in language terms to like, well, what kind of thing are we talking about? So I think it's absolutely critical that we try our best as parents, as mothers, to have these open conversations, but it relates to our own ability to do that with ourselves, and
yeah, I mean, becoming a mother, I mean, even just that process of giving birth and, and like I said, and I'm coming from a very far end of the spectrum, I got to understand my own body in a totally different way. Sometimes people will say, after giving birth, your whole version of modesty changes.
Oh, yes.
And I mean, you privacy in all kinds of ways have just kind of escaped from my life since becoming a mother.
Yes.
So, and I think it's also like, it's important to acknowledge that if you didn't grow up calling your vagina to all of a sudden at whatever age you are to switch a lifetime of feelings, it's hard. And I think, to say to whoever's listening, I understand that it's hard, and you don't have to, in overnight change the entire way you've been indoctrinated to think about your body and to think about sex. You can do it in a slow, as you feel empowered kind of way. I think there's some great books out there that you can find. I always kind of stay away from just digging around on the internet. I don't always think that it's necessarily accurate information, empowering information. I think there's lots of different sources, but there's ways to have that kind of to exposure, and then you start to feel more comfortable. And maybe it's just one word, maybe even just using that word clitoris was a huge deal for you as an individual. Celebrate that. That's and how you're evolving and how you're feeling comfortable speaking. Because we haven't all been raised in a family that spoke about these things. Some families made sexuality and bodies almost a shameful thing.
Yes.
And it's to recognize that we're all coming from those different places, but that doesn't mean at whatever age you are and whatever state of being you are, that you can't start to learn these things and to have an empowered relationship with your body and sexuality.
Yeah, completely. Now, one thing we haven't covered, I mean, because we're obviously talking a lot about women, about men's sex toys.
Yeah, and there are lots of them. And I think people are always very surprised how many.
There's loads, aren't there?
There are loads of them, and they come in all different ways. So you'll have,
no pun intended, eh?
Yes, of course. You have to. Your language can be can be taken in all different directions in this space. There's lots of, they call them masturbation sleeves.
Yep.
So think of you put your penis inside something and use it as a masturbatory tool. The fleshlight is kind of one of the most well-known. I think from a design perspective, these are absolutely adorable. They're called Tenga eggs, and they look like little plastic egg shape, and inside is a silicone, masturbatory, kind of like I was saying, like a penis. You put it over your penis and it can have different kind of textures to it. So for different sensations. And then there's lots of prostate stimulation toys for men. The Aneros is kind of one of the famous ones. So when a man's prostate is stimulated, it can be a very highly arousing experience and can also cause ejaculation. So I think, sometimes it's not just the penis, there's all kinds of things, all different, associated close by areas that can be stimulated.
Yeah, what sex toys are there for testicles?
Oh, directly for testicles. I can't think of one at the moment, but I 100% know they exist.
Yeah, they must do. That's why, as you were talking, I was like, I'm familiar with these, but I'm just realizing that I've missed a piece.
No, but
they must do.
I can't. They must do. And I think that's that when it comes to sex, and it's kind of it's an expression that my grandma would always use, there's a lid for every pot.
So yes, that's a great.
It's, for every kind of thing that everything and anything can be a sexual turn on for somebody. So watching somebody smoke a cigarette, watching somebody blow up a piece of bubble gum, to every, like a certain kind of material, person's wearing a sweater out of a particular fabric. Our sexuality and what feels good on our bodies and different parts of our bodies is so vast. So I think, people say that your imagination is actually the most potent form of your sense of self and sexuality. And so being able to play with those. And I think sometimes we just get so stuck on genitalia and stimulating genitalia that it misses this larger idea. There have been lots of sex toys that have been created that are, maybe it's just more about like the tickling of your skin in a non-erotic zone. Yeah. And, that also can count as a sex toy.
Of course.
For people, and, kind of extrapolating it, but maybe, a corset that is putting, the way that it feels on the body can feel erotic. So there's lots of accessories to sexuality and the erotic that don't necessarily get used directly onto genitals.
Absolutely. Feathers and, for instance, the fine kind of just that feather just along the skin, as you say, that's, and of course, as we're talking now, my memory has, my little computer in my head has suddenly realized, well, of course, there's testicle stretchers and there's weights that are attached and it was obviously in there somewhere, but, and crushers. Some men love their testicles to be crushed, their balls to be really crushed and, or contained. And and that's clearly very genital focused. But, the feel of leather on the skin or latex, or as you say, sex toys are not exclusively about, the genital zone. It's so vast. And there are so many ways to, there was this thing I just remembered. I remember when I was researching some of what I termed in my research kind of more backstreet sex shops. I'm not talking about your Ann Summers or, your high street places or your beautiful glass dildos or any of the very high, more expensive shops. I'm really talking about the old traditional shops where people kind of quickly go in, shuffle about and come out. And they still do really exist in some parts. I really never really got to grips with sex dolls. I don't mean just for me. I'm not talking about, do I need a blow-up husband? No. I prefer an invisible one. If I'm going to have one at all. But joking apart, sex, dolls, like, and I'm not talking about the kind of a hen potty sheep or even, like, it's not the hens, is it? It's the stag. But, in the museum, did you have any pieces around, sex dolls?
Yes, actually, I've had quite a lot of exposure to them. So there's a company called Abyss Creations, and they are the maker of the Real Doll. And so the Real Doll is this, people use them for sexual purposes. They also use them for companionship, but in this particular doll, it has a fully...
Well, hang on. Wait a minute. I've got to stop you. Did you just say that people use them for companionship?
Yes.
Okay, what do you mean by that? So I have to just stop you there because I'm like, wow, hold on.
Yeah, I mean, it's a mimic of a living partnership. So if you, instead of, let's say, living by yourself, you have this entity that, it may not be a sentient entity that keeps you company. And maybe there are some real doll owners that they will, take their real doll to the movies. They will have their real doll sit with them while they're having their dinner. Because I think sometimes people will go to a sex worker, not just for the physical act, the physical sexual act, but also having that moment of intimacy or closeness. Obviously, that's with a person, but this is a proxy to that person.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
And I know sometimes these things can take like that extra layer of like, okay, thinking about it. But the fact that all of these things do exist, and particularly with this one, the real doll has a fully articulated skeleton. So her skeleton, it's a metal skeleton, and her limbs move. Her body moves. And then she's made out of an incredibly high grade silicone.
Right.
And the silicone can also, I've heard of people putting, kind of like a electric blanket over it, and it can warm to almost body temperature. And people build these dolls to their specifications. So you can say, I would like the eyes to be green. I'd like the hair to be like this kind of makeup, this kind of nails, this breast size, this breast shape, this kind of, maybe yes, body hair, not body hair, everything that you could imagine.
Mm-hmm.
And all of the, orifices of this doll work. And I mean, can be used for sexual purposes. Mm-hmm. So you have something like that. You also have, there's a whole space of sex robots that, people and academics are talking about this a lot.
Mm-hmm.
What was the TV show? Westworld?
Mm-hmm.
And you have a lot of this, sex dolls is also not a new thing. They used to call them, hundreds and hundreds of years ago, they would say that sailors would have these, they'd call them dames de voyage, and they were mimics of
Mm-hmm.
women that the sailors would, have sex with. That's hundreds and hundreds of years ago. Technology has changed, and there's a theory that's applied to a lot of sexuality is as soon as there's a new technology, it's incorporated into sex.
Yes.
So,
Mm-hmm.
okay, now you have incredibly high-grade silicone. Oh, okay, let's apply that to all kinds of sex toys. Let's apply that to sex dolls. Wow, our technology use, you have Siri, you have Alexa.
Yes.
Oh, what if I combine that with a sex doll and I have this robotic technology, maybe the body can move. We see it in all these different spaces. Why wouldn't it also be applied to sex?
Yeah, of course.
And so we're kind of on the forefront of how these things will work. Will they be able to be made at price points that are more affordable to the average person? So a real doll, I think is, it's about $10,000.
Mm-hmm.
So it is a very large investment. But as
not if you've got a really gorgeous girlfriend beside you.
Well, exactly. Everybody values their money and use in different ways.
Mm-hmm.
They're beautiful. Just from like a sculptural perspective, if you don't even look at them from a sex perspective, they're beautiful.
Yeah.
I've displayed them a lot in the museum. And they make both male and female dolls, which I think is interesting. And we had torsos of a male doll and a female doll in the gallery that people could touch. So, it's a museum. Most of the artifacts are behind glass. They're protected. But it is important. So we allowed people to be able to touch and feel the different materials and see, okay, this real doll, this fancy real doll, what does that actually feel like? And what was so interesting to me, just to observe this as a curator and as an anthropologist, that people were so rough with the body of the female real doll, but hardly that way with the male real doll. So people would, grab the breasts of this real doll torso. They would, the way that they would touch, you could touch, her vulval area. So gruff. But you had this male doll, you could touch his chest, you could touch his penis, but people were so hesitant to do so.
What did you make of that?
I think it's one, how we treat female bodies, male bodies, but I also think it's less taboo to touch this woman's body than to touch this man's body. For both men, women, heterosexual, not heterosexual, do we carry around all of these? Oh, what is somebody going to think about me?
It's fascinating about these dolls. It's absolutely fascinating, and particularly the combination of things like VR, robots, all of this, the technology that makes the future of sex toys. I mean, the possibilities are endless. It's very exciting. I mean, the sex dolls, the real dolls, I mean, how extraordinary. I'm going to jump to an assumption, actually, that we've said it's not good to make assumptions, but I'm going to out myself anyway, that because we all do. So I'm assuming that the sales of real dolls, even though there's male and female ones, is, like 80%, 90% towards men buying the female ones.
Yes, that's definitely an accurate assumption.
Yeah, I mean, I must say, I don't have a sex doll. I already said that at the beginning, that, it's an area that I was curious about in the sex shops, very curious, but it wasn't at this level of, sophistication that they were in these particular, and some of them are quite high end, but that even in those, not the backstreet ones, and I don't know anybody that's ever told me they have one either. So it's something that's not even in my sphere, despite really, really living in the sex toy industry for a while. And I talk to makers of sex toys and sex toy related things like, I don't know, even things like Barbies having sex. There's, in the Castro district in San Francisco, there was some sex shops there that were having, they're having loads and loads of success selling these dolls, but obviously not for sexual acts with human beings, but just as pieces of, art in their homes. And they loved them, and Kens and all sorts of dolls that were actually engaging in sexual acts. But and I talked to the people that actually created them and how that happened. But yeah, it's a whole area with sex dolls that's really fascinating, because I think also as a behaviorist, I'm curious about the relationship that one would have with that doll. Whether I would have kind of whatever I'd call him. I call everything. I call my car, my fridge, we have names for everything in our house, including the kettle, which is, by the way, called Matt. Mm-hmm. If you look on a kettle, it might have Max on it, so why not call it Max? We have to call him something. And then what I have, how would I decide to have sex with, let's say, Nigel or Steve or Henry? Is it a night for Henry and I? I'm like, yes.
No, and it's a great place for our, an imagination to, maybe this will be totally commonplace in a couple of generations. You have,
yes.
I think technology is more and more and more a part of our everyday. I mean, if I'm honest, and my husband makes fun of me constantly, my phone, I think I'm having an affair with my phone. So I am with my phone scrolling through probably Instagram late night, kind of venturing, looking at art, looking at design, looking, people's lives, whatever it may be. But I have this technological object with me all the time. It is, but that's insane for my grandmother. She's like, my relationship with my phone is she just can't comprehend it. So maybe, as we progress, our lives become more technology integrated. We have no idea how we're going to see that. I think sometimes there's these news stories that come out that, young people, let's say, I'll give them one example, young men in Japan are not having as much sex as they used to. They're only having these kind of like cyber experiences or, virtual girlfriends or, and this is a huge population issue. So if we're more and more distant from sex with another person, how is this going to impact society? Well, we do have, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, Japanese, it's well known that in Japan that, there's an increasing number of Japanese men who are actually, turning their backs on marriage and actually creating relationships with sex dolls. And, there is a plummeting birth rate, isn't there?
Yeah, it's also a country that has been so advanced when it comes to technological development. So you see these things sometimes hand in hand. It doesn't mean that, oh my God, there's going to be this crisis and, a real life woman is never going to have a sexual partner again. I think that maybe it would be in addition to, or, there's always that other side of things. I saw, maybe it's a partner for somebody who maybe is in the disability space and wouldn't be able to access a partner, or you lived in a completely rural place. Like there's statistics, because of China's one child policy for such a long time, there is I'm going to kind of be making up numbers a little bit, but 1 million extra men than to women. So, would it be wrong if there's 1 million extra men that will never have a partner, will never have a wife, will never be able to have some form of companionship? So you start playing with all of these kind of different ideas of what sex and sexuality is.
Well, these dolls are certainly less demanding, aren't they?
You know what? In different ways. They have all different needs. So
yeah, I mean, what I mean is in terms of they listen, and I'm imagining from, again, this is a huge stereotype, but I'm wondering if from a man's perspective, the romance and the doll relationship would erase a lot of the complaints and the demands of the men in terms of at the emotional level, of connecting on an emotional level.
Yeah, it could. And I think and then maybe you'll have a surge in the other direction saying, in the way that some people will, go to a dominatrix that is there to humiliate them and is there to berate them. Sometimes you swing one way and then you go the other way and your needs change and you want something totally different. So maybe you go from, okay, this human relationship was too much and too many demands to, no, that's actually exactly what I want.
It's fascinating. It really is. I mean, we've got next generation sex bots coming up and all sorts of possibilities, aren't there? I mean, I think it's extremely exciting. And part of me's got, I only wish you could see a shot of my face. I mean, I'm like, part of me is like, whoa.
It is. I mean, it is. Like I said, even for me, this is my work, this is my space, but you have to be like, wow, will we be like this? Is this the future of society? And, I think it's kind of exciting to think about, wow, the world doesn't stay the same. It's a totally different place than it was 20 years ago, 50 years ago, 100 years ago. And because of all of that technology, the change is happening at even a more rapid pace.
It's extraordinary. Sarah, this has been a wonderfully rich, wide-ranging conversation, delving into areas that I just didn't even think we'd go, by the way. So thank you from the bottom of my heart that you come on and be so wise and open for a private woman. and thank you so much for this, because seriously, that you've got knowledge that so few people would have. You really do.
I kind of, like I said, I kind of stumbled into this profession in certain ways. I knew I wanted to study people, but being able to study sexuality, which I didn't plan, has given me almost the best understanding of people and why we do what we do and the nuances to that. And I think what I've been able to do now, combining kind of that expertise and my time at the Museum of Sex, and now, my role as mother, to really look at motherhood and sexuality as this really important space of inquiry and conversation. And so that's why I'm focusing my next book called Mama Sex on this topic, because I think motherhood and sexuality, the way we see ourselves, the way we think about ourselves, the way we think about sex and sexuality is a topic of conversation that, one, I think we're all interested in, and I think really is due a smarter conversation on, and a deeper conversation.
I couldn't agree with you more. And I know listeners will run towards your upcoming book, Mama Sex. It's going to be out when you finish it, isn't it? It's as simple as that.
Yes. Well, that's the deal with motherhood. Your writing always takes that little bit longer.
Doesn't it just? Yes, I'm in that boat myself. So yeah, absolutely. But I know it's going to be a big success. And thank you again for being on the School for Mothers podcast. It's been a blast.
No, it's been a great chat.
Thank you.
Great chat. And thanks. I get to use all of this I have a head full of sex facts, so it's great to be able to share it with people who are interested.
Yeah. Oh, I know they'll be interested. So thank you. Thank you, Sarah. Lots of love.
Thank you so much. Bye.
If you enjoyed this episode, and I really hope you did, I'd love to hear from you. You can leave a rating and a review over on Apple Podcasts, or email me on hello@schoolformothers.com. That's hello@schoolformothers.com. Well, that's all for now, listeners. Thanks so much for tuning in. Have a fantastic week, and of course, stay safe. Sending you lots of love.
Thank you for tuning in to the School for Mothers podcast. To continue the conversation and keep your dose of inspiration up, head over to schoolformothers.com/podcast, where you'll find bonus content from Danusha and her guests on habits, recommendations, books, best apps, time-saving secrets, life hacks, health, sleep and anything in between. That's schoolformothers.com/podcast.